David Dodge. I'm the executive editor of Gays with Kids. This webinar is about choosing a path to fatherhood. It goes over the 4 primary paths that are available to queer men who are interested in becoming dads. So we'll be covering surrogacy, adoption, foster care, and co-parenting. So each of these paths are complicated, as you already know, or you wouldn't be on a webinar to learn more about them. But we're going to go into as much detail about each of them as we can. But this webinar really is intended to give kind of a general overview of each of these paths to parenthood. And then we're going to leave a good 30 minutes towards the end for people to ask as many questions as we have time for. You'll hear me repeat this multiple times throughout the webinar, but if you aren't able to get your question answered, or if we're not able to answer your question in sufficient detail for whatever reason, please do email us at dads@gayswithkids.com, and we will get back to you as soon as we can with answers from one of our experts. So just before I turn it over to our panelists and introduce them, just a little bit more about Gays with Kids in case this is your first exposure to us. We were started almost 7 years ago now by a gay couple, Brian and Ferd, who have become dads via surrogacy and adoption. And they created the site because they were frustrated at the time that there weren't many resources available specifically to queer men who were interested in navigating these very complicated paths to parenthood. And so Gays with Kids was born. And in the first several years, we worked at trying to increase visibility of queer fatherhood. So we interviewed as many gay dads as we could find and published their stories. We put their photos on Instagram, and the community has really blown up in the year since. And it's been really great to see how much it's grown. But increasingly over the years, we started to hear from our community. It's great, visibility is great, and we're very happy to be contributing that. But people that are not dads yet, who are now inspired to become them, still lack the tools they needed to really navigate each of these processes as well as they could. And so, we decided we wanted to be the place to do that. So we want to be the place you can come to the minute fatherhood enters your mind, where you can come to a webinar like this, hear all of your options. And just so you know, we have an extensive webinar series developed around adoption and surrogacy already. We're going to be rolling one out around foster care in the coming months, and then co-parenting eventually, which really does walk you through each step of the process. So even though you're going to get a very quick overview of each of these paths on this particular webinar, there's a whole series of other ones that will go into the costs of each of these, how you match with a birth parent for adoption, how you match with a surrogate and surrogacy. So definitely visit gayswithkids.com and look at our events page, where you can find links to all of the upcoming webinars that we're going to be hosting. And you can we'll be posting these on our social media, and you can follow us there too at Gays with Kids if you're not already. And you can find out about all the different resources that we're rolling out over the next couple months. Okay, with that, I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists here, and then I'm going to let them do a little bit more of an introduction when we get to them, because I do really want to get through as much of this as we can, because we have a lot of good information to share. So again, I'm David Dodge. I'm the executive editor of Gays with Kids. We're also joined by Bonnie Sharp, who's the quality assurance manager for Extraordinary Families, Olivia Pope, who's the community outreach and development manager for Friends and Adoption, and Anthony Brown, who's the outreach associate and attorney for Circle Surrogacy and Adoption, and egg donation. So what are we, I've already kind of gone over this, but what are we going to go over today? So we are going to be going over the 4 main paths to parenthood, like I've already said. We want you to know what the major considerations are for each, what some of the advantages are to each, and also what some of the challenges are with each, because they all, despite all being amazing and equally valid ways to become a dad, they all come with unique challenges that it's important to be aware of. And then we also want to end with making sure that you know the next steps, how you can, if you're interested in one of these paths, what's the next step to take? So again, the 4 paths that we're going to go over in detail are surrogacy, adoption, fostering, and co-parenting. And just that last one, what you may be less familiar with, but it's called intentional co-parenting, which is becoming more common between gay men and lesbian couples, for instance, who decide to have a platonic parenting arrangement, or even between people of whatever gender that decide that they don't need to be in a relationship in order to become a parent. So with that, we're going to delve right in. Enough of me talking. We're going to start with surrogacy. So I'm going to turn it over to Anthony.
Hello. How are you? Thank you so much, David, for having me. I don't know if my camera is on. If you can see me, I hope you can.
I can. Yep, you're good.
Okay, perfect. My name is Anthony Brown. I am an outreach associate and an attorney at Circle Surrogacy. I also have a private practice in New York City doing adoption and surrogacy law. I am also a parent through surrogacy. My husband and I went through the process 13 years ago. Our son is 11 and just started middle school, which is the subject of an entirely different webinar. I try to, when I can, bring in my personal experience into the work that I'm doing. And with surrogacy, it is incredibly personal for me. Making the decision to have a family as a gay man is one of the most personal decisions that you will ever make. And there's no one right way to make that decision. There's only the right way for you to make that decision. My husband and I had tried for the longest time to go through the adoption route before we landed on surrogacy, or were fortunate enough to land on surrogacy. So I want to share a little bit about my experience, a little bit about how we do things at Circle Surrogacy, and just sort of review some of the distinctions between family building through surrogacy and then through adoption, foster, and co-parenting. So with surrogacy, there is a biological connection to your child, which can be important for many people. There are many intended parents at Circle who were adopted and very, they made the decision very clearly to go through surrogacy because they wanted to share a biological relationship with the child because they didn't have a biological relationship with their family. I can tell you though, I am not the biological parent of my son, and I could not love him more than if I were. But that is one of the unique decisions that you make in a surrogacy journey. Surrogacy journeys can be restricted by cost, so you may restrict the number of children that you're having. And if you're in a couple, then you're going to want to have that discussion. I'm fortunate enough to be a donor dad to a lesbian couple, so I had the opportunity to have that experience. So we knew that my husband would be the biological parent of our child. One of the absolutely unique sort of environments that surrogacy provides, it really is a leap of faith, and it's a leap of faith with an incredible group of people around you. You are going to choose an egg donor, and you're going to have to make the decision whether you want your egg donor to be known, semi-known, or anonymous. That is a decision, that's one of the first decisions usually in a surrogacy journey, trying to figure out who the other component of the biology of your child is going to be. My husband and I knew that we wanted to have a known egg donor. We were able to find that through Circle. Circle has an egg donation division that has a number of known egg donors available. We wanted that because of the relationship that I had with my daughters. Even though I'm not their legal parent, I am known to them as Papa, as I am to my son. And it was important that we were able to provide our son with that kind of understanding and relationship. Your surrogate, it is the literally most unique relationship you'll ever have with another individual. You develop organically a bond with this person. And I think when you're on the front side of a surrogacy process, your greatest fears are that the surrogate's going to change her mind, or that she's going to not be able to provide you the child at the end of the journey. I know from the surrogate's point of views, their greatest fear usually is that you're not going to have any communication or contact with them after the journey is over, because it is such a devoted and emotional journey that lasts well beyond 9 months. We are still very good friends with our surrogate, and Circle, every agency encourages a strong relationship with their surrogate, but Circle's business model essentially is relationship based. It's all about creating and supporting that relationship. Circle has a really big team also. You have, when you're a parent with Circle, you have an accountant, a lawyer, a program manager, and a social worker, all assigned to just your journey. So you always have someone to support you and answer your questions throughout. There really is a huge team involved. In surrogacy, you're not only going to be working with your agency, but you're also going to be working with a clinic, an IVF clinic, because a substantial part of the surrogacy journey is creating embryos for your surrogate to carry. One of the great things also about surrogacy is that you can start your journey in different places. Granted, there are no drunken surrogacies. Everything is very carefully planned out, but you can start with the clinic portion and with your egg donor and create embryos and then freeze your embryos and wait for a while until you want to start the surrogacy journey. With Circle, you can start with the agency and then move in to create your embryos and then match with your surrogate. Usually the matching takes about 6 to 7 months from when you sign on with an agency, and some agencies will not match you until you already have embryos created. So that's a question that you're going to want to ask of your agency. That is not a prerequisite for Circle by any means. The challenges of surrogacy, and I think the thing that most people think about, are the costs around it, because you are looking at, from the medical side, costs that are going to range between $30,000 and $50,000 to create your embryos. And then from the surrogacy side, they can range anywhere from $125,000 to $150,000, depending on whether you're having an egg donor involved in the process, or whether you're going to use the surrogacy agency as your egg donor agency as well. So you're really looking at costs that can approach $200,000, and that is definitely a consideration. One of the things that I did before joining Circle, I was the founding board chairman of an organization called Men Having Babies. We started that organization because we wanted to create a foundation. Essentially, we were working within the Gay and Lesbian Center in New York City, and we were working under their 501c3. But in order to do what we wanted to do as an organization, we had to branch out on our own. And Men Having Babies actually has a program called the Gay Parenting Assistance Program. And if you qualify, there are 2 levels of assistance that you can get with this. The first level of assistance is discounts by contributing providers. Circle Surrogacy provides a discount of $10,000 to any GPAP Stage 1 member. And many IVF clinics who work with Men Having Babies also provide that discount. The second stage of benefits through Men Having Babies is essentially you have to self-fund about $60,000 of this big journey, but then agencies like Circle, clinics that are involved with Men Having Babies, they donate services, and Men Having Babies assigns you to one of the agencies or clinics that donates those services. So that is one way of offsetting costs. At Circle, there is also, we have a relationship with an organization called Origin Financial, which actually allows non-collateralized loans of $65,000 to assist in the money aspect of the journey. If you have equity in your home, a home equity line of credit is a good low interest way of being able to fund this journey. And then ultimately, the timeline for the journey. When you sign on with Circle, the timeline is approximately 17 to 22 months from when you actually sign on to work with us to when you have your child. The last thing that I want to mention, and I don't want to go over my time, I'm conscious of that, is the comment that says that there's no legal risk. I think one of the benefits of surrogacy is that because it's so carefully planned out, and because it's all based on the state law where your carrier gives birth, that there is a legal foundation for you to create your family and have a court order that terminates the rights of the surrogate and her spouse if she's married, and names you and your partner or spouse, if you have one, as the legal parents of the child at the end of the journey. So it really does take off the worry about the security of your family from a legal perspective. It is one of the unique elements of surrogacy, I think, that a lot of people find very comforting, and one of the reasons why they choose surrogacy. So I want to pass this back to you, David, to introduce the next speaker, but I am sticking around to answer any questions for you, and I'd be happy to talk about my experience as well. Thanks,
Great.
David.
Thank you so much, Anthony. So if your head is spinning with questions right now, as I'm sure it is, again, we're asking it's a lot to ask of our panelists to cover these complicated processes in 5 minutes. We are going to, again, try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but you can feel free to start asking your questions now. I'll be compiling them and facilitating the Q&A at the end. You can use the Q&A function that you see at the top of your screen, or you can chat it privately if you prefer to do that. But with that, we're going to turn it over to Olivia for our slide on adoption.
Hi, my name is Olivia. Thanks, David. And I'm with Friends in Adoption. And I'm going to give you the rundown of adoption with opportunity for questions at the end. So, every adoption, there's different ways to go with adoption. I'm going to start with that. You can either go through an agency, you can go independently through an attorney, and you can also choose between domestic and international. So every adoption agency is going to be a little bit different, but these bullet points are pretty broad throughout most agencies, kind of within the US. And then I'm just going to sort of use my knowledge from my years at Friends in Adoption. So for the most part, the benefits is that, you're welcoming a child into your home that has been lovingly chosen for you by a birth parent. And for the most part, not always, but a lot of the times the birth parent becomes involved in the child's life, which we say is a benefit, right? That's something that we look forward to, is having, we call it the adoption circle. I think sometimes it's called the triad or the triangle, but at Friends in Adoption and a lot of agencies, we call it the circle, right? So some of the challenges I think of adoption are that it can be expensive. You can see also on the slide where it says, the prices are anywhere between 20 and 45, and more expensive if you get into international. And independent is sort of a touch and go depending on what your situation looks like. But from an agency perspective, I would say Friends in Adoption is between 35 and 45,000. The other thing is that although we say that, absolutely that a birth parent being involved is a benefit to you and your child, that it's birth parent driven. So it can be a lack of control in the situation where the birth parent is choosing you, you are not choosing. The birth parent is choosing whether they want post-adoption contact. That's not really up to you, right? So it's very, very birth parent driven. And the other thing is just the waiting period. So I would say that on a good spree, we're at about 6 months waiting. But we usually tell people at Friends in Adoption that the average wait time is going to be about 13 months. Which, I don't think is terrible, but it can go past that. So I think that is something that, you have to be prepared for, is that waiting and knowing that you might have conversations with birth parents and they don't go anywhere, things like that. So it's really you're sort of at the edge of your seat waiting to be chosen, right? So I think that can be a challenging process for people. But with that said, that when your adoption comes, and we always say when and not if, that it is the right choice. You may have gone over a couple bumps, and then the birth parent is sure, and it's a good connection. So we always say that the waiting and the conversations are what makes it worth it. So I'm not sure, the bottom of the slide is at wait time, 6 to 17 months.
Yeah.
Okay, I was assuming, I was just making sure. I sort of already covered that. Every agency is going to be different, and it's going to be different depending on what your process looks like. But I would say right now, we're probably at 10 to 13 months at Friends in Adoption, about what it takes. So then that looks like once you once you sign and surrender with your birth parent, it's usually like a 4 to 6 month period after the adoption to be finalized. So there is a lot of waiting, but like I said, it is meant to be when it's meant to be, and it's a really wonderful experience. So there's a lot of in-depth information about the birth parent process, and so I would encourage you to ask questions. I think we have quite a bit of time at the end for questions, so I don't want to take too much time about adoption, but I'm here to answer those questions when you think of them.
Great. We already have a lot of great questions coming in. I'm logging them, and we're going to get through them as quickly and as much as we can. But now let's turn it over to Bonnie for our foster care slide.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bonnie Sharp. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the Quality Assurance Manager with Extraordinary Families. We're a nonprofit foster care and adoption agency that serves all of Los Angeles County. And I've been with Extraordinary Families for 7 years, and in the field of child welfare for, I think, 11 years now. And so adopting from foster care, it's a beautiful way to both help a child and also grow your family. But before I actually talk about the benefits, I think it's important to actually talk a little bit about foster care in general. In the simplest of terms, the foster care system refers to the various services that are designed to ensure children's safety and well-being. If you think about it nationally, there's, I think, more than 400,000 children in foster care, and 100,000 of those children are actually waiting to be adopted. They enter foster care through no fault of their own because they've been abused, neglected, or abandoned, and they remain in care temporarily with resource parents, which are foster parents, or relatives until they're able to safely return to their families, or they are adopted or age out of the system and transition into adulthood. So on average, children remain in care for about 20 months. Older children, sibling sets, children with developmental disabilities, and youth who identify as LGBTQ+ tend to remain in care longer and are also less likely to be adopted. Just a little bit of a disclaimer, the administrative framework for how foster care services are delivered, it varies from state to state. So I'm not as well versed in state administered systems, but for county administered systems here, like in California, county placement agencies, they either use their own licensed homes or foster family agencies, or FFAs, for the placement of children in foster care. And FFAs, like Extraordinary Families, we're nonprofits, and we're engaged in the recruiting, certifying, and training of resource parents, finding temporary or permanent families for children, and providing both the children and the resource families with the ongoing professional support and advocacy that they need for the duration of the time the child is in care. The additional support, I think, is perhaps or one of the biggest benefits. When you adopt from foster care, the support is sometimes greater too when you work with an FFA. So like at Extraordinary Families, all of our resource parents, they're assigned an experienced master level social worker who can provide them all the resources and support and advocacy they need. We offer our family support groups and peer mentors. We have a family support specialist who's available for individual consultation and additional support. Our resource parents have access to staff for assistance as needed, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and more. Another huge benefit of adopting from foster care is that it costs little to no money. So when you think about independent adoptions that, like Olivia was discussing, it can be somewhere, I think, between $30,000 to $50,000, and then surrogacy can be upwards of $200,000. In comparison, adopting from foster care can cost somewhere between a couple $100s to maybe a couple thousand, and that's just dependent upon where you live, because remember, each state administers foster care services differently. In general, I think you can expect some incidental fees. That would look like some costs for fingerprinting, medical examinations, first aid CPR certification, and some other adoption related costs. And some of this is actually reimbursed after your adoption is finalized. In some states, the home study is actually free. Legal fees for adoption may be covered, and the resource parents may also be able to take advantage of a monthly adoption stipend. And likewise, resource parents also receive a monthly stipend to help them care for the child while the child is in foster care. And children adopted from foster care actually receive health coverage under Medicaid until they're 18, and in some cases until they're 21. And children actually may also be eligible for free college tuition or various grants and vouchers to offset the cost of higher education. But adoption from foster care, of course, is not without challenges, and it's different from other paths to parenthood in a few very important ways. First and foremost, the primary goal of foster care is always to reunify the children with their families. So resource parents must support reunification and the child's relationship to their birth family. And this requires a commitment to include a child as a member of your family, creating that sense of safety and belonging, whether the child remains in your care for just one day or lifelong. So even though that's the case, I will say, if your goal is to ultimately adopt from foster care, you can and you will. It may or may not be the first child who joins your home, but if you commit to the process, you will one day welcome a child into your home and become that child's forever family. One thing I like to always say too, so for every child you welcome into your heart and your home along the way, on this journey, you're also actually providing safety, stability, and love for a child when quite literally no one else could. Second, because all children in foster care have experienced trauma, because remember, they're coming into care because of abuse or neglect or abandonment. parents who adopt from foster care, they must receive some specific training to understand the effects of trauma and how to help children heal. The effects of trauma may vary depending upon the child and the type of experience, and it can affect the child's behavior in ways that may be confusing or distressing to our caregivers. It can impact the child's long-term health and well-being. But the really good news is that children are just amazingly resilient, and with understanding and care and proper treatment, children can and do heal and thrive. We know there's no shortage, unfortunately, of children in foster care, but I encourage you all, let me say this, there's no shortage of children in foster care, but there definitely is a shortage of resource parents. So I encourage you all who are joining today to consider adopting from foster care. I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Bonnie. Okay, so again, these are all very complicated paths to parenthood, and I thank my panelists for being so brief so we can get into the Q&A as quickly as possible. I promise to do the same for co-parenting, so I kind of become the co-parenting resident expert at Gays with Kids because it is my path to parenthood. I didn't know, Anthony, you were also a donor, so I became a dad 6 years ago after a lesbian couple, good friends of mine, asked me to consider being their known donor. And that kind of opened up a whole new world to me that I hadn't really considered before. And it is, but it's an increasingly common way for queer people in particular to form their families. And I'm pretty confident that a generation from now, this is going to be a much more visible form. But because it's a relatively newer form for queer people to be becoming parents, there's not a ton of resources out there about this. So that's what we're hoping to start to rectify by putting out more resources over the course of this next year. So please stay tuned for that. But so some of the benefits of co-parenting. And so this is a kind of an umbrella term that we use to talk about this path that covers everything from my situation and Anthony's, which is a donor situation where, you know, I have no parental rights or responsibilities to my children, but I'm very much involved in their lives. I know known donors who have donated and are very not very much in the lives of the children that they've helped to bring into the world. I know known donors that live with their kids. So it goes in all different sorts of ways. But it does allow for a biological connection to your child if that's something that you're interested in happening. You know, it allows you to be a little bit creative. We have a lot of really great stories on our website, gayswithkids.com, that talk about different ways that people are forming these connections. So sometimes it's two single gay men that are in a platonic friendship, but decide they want to parent together. Oftentimes it's between lesbian couples and gay couples. And the benefits of doing so is, you know, there's, especially if there's, you know, multiple couples kind of helping parent, there's, you know, we always say that there's never too many loving adults you can have in a child's life. So it really can be kind of a fun, interesting way to parent. So the challenge is because this is a newer area of parenting, the law really is not caught up yet to the unique ways that LGBTQ people are forming families. That's true across the board for all of these for all these paths, but I would say it's very much true for this one as well. So depending on the state you're in, you might need to look a little bit deeper into the laws to make sure that you're doing everything above board and that you feel confident in and maybe Anthony can speak a little bit more to this if he's familiar with it as our lawyer on the panel. But so definitely you cannot do this, or you should not do this, I should say, without the help of a lawyer. And you really do need to, you know, you should take the time to draw up a contract and to really talk through everything. My friends and I took 6 months to think about this before we agreed to do this together, talking through every eventuality, talking about what my role would be, everything from what, you know, my children would end up calling me, if I would even call them my children, like all of these details are important. And, you know, if there are more than two people involved, if it's two couples or a couple and a single person, in 99% of instances, you're not all going to be legal parents to the child. You're not going to all be on the birth certificate. So there are a couple of places here and there where that's like changing, but not, it's, you know, I think we're still quite a ways away from the place where you can have more than two people on a birth certificate or have any sort of legal connection to the child. So that is a challenge. If things go awry, if things don't work out, then, you know, there are plenty of instances of known donor arrangements and co-parenting arrangements that go awry. If you look on the internet, those are the first things to come up. It's actually why I started to write about my own experience because there weren't any positive examples out there, but I can guarantee you there are many, many different positive examples of co-parenting happening out there, and they're happening more and more. So the cost is pretty negligible, and this is a big advantage to having a child this way. It really depends on insurance. and legal fees, things like that. But it's this 9,000 figure is kind of something I think it really does range depending on your unique set of circumstances. But again, doing this ideally with insurance and ideally with a lawyer, those are going to be your main costs. So, I would say, again, this time frame 1 to 2 years is also a little bit made up. It's going to take the time it's going to take. Part of this 2 years is obviously the pregnancy. But really, I would say the legwork here is between you and your friends, because there isn't a great legal framework for doing this yet. That you need to be, pretty confident that you're doing this with people that you trust, and that you can agree upon, certain eventualities happening well before they do. And that's, I would say the most important part of this is that, don't just walk into this without really having deep conversations about the implications, because it's easy for people to talk as adults about this, but you are bringing a child into the world, and that child will be impacted by the arrangement that you formed. So it is important to be thinking about that at the outset as much as you can. Okay, so with that, I'm going to make sure that we get to the Q&A like I promised. I did want to just quickly, though, I also forgot to do this at the beginning, but the people you see on the screen, the panelists here, and all of the experts on our website, if you go to our partners to Fatherhood on gateswithkids.com, these are all organizations that have a long, successful track record of working with LGBTQ families. You will find in each of these paths, you have a lot of options for organizations and advocate clinics and lawyers that you can go talk to about pursuing these paths. They're not all created equal. Some have the success and the track record, and really the commitment. It's not just being LGBTQ friendly, but it's being competent with the unique challenges that our communities face. So I cannot endorse the people that you see on this screen and the others on our website enough. It really does matter who you work with. And so these are, you are in very good hands with the questions that you have. Again, we have a ton that I'm excited to get into in just a second. But just as a quick shout out, and I'm also going to make sure that I put in their website so you can follow up with them directly in the chat, but I'll do that more towards the end of the conversation. Okay, so with that, here you can see our cute little Q&A screen, but I'm actually going to stop our screen share because I would prefer to be able to see us all at the same time. Okay, so again, I promise we're going to get through as many of these as possible. This is actually my favorite webinar because it's cool to get so many questions from a diverse range of perspectives. We probably won't get to them all. Again, email us at dads@gateswithkids.com, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. I'm going to take the questions that we can, kind of work the best across each of these paths. Yeah, so just bear with us as we try to get through as many of these as we can. So the first one we got, which I think is a great one, is about closed adoptions. And so I wonder, Olivia, if you can just talk about, so the question is specifically just to talk about, I guess if we can frame it in the difference between open and closed adoptions, what those arrangements look like. And if you can just talk about the reasons why we've seen a shift, a pretty dramatic shift towards open adoptions instead of closed.
Yes, I'm glad somebody brought that up because everything leaves my mind when I start talking on those slides. So I'm glad that that someone asked that question. So when you're working with an adoption, you have the closed or open adoption, and then in the middle, semi-open, semi-closed, and that's a pretty big spectrum, right? That's going to look like all sorts of different things. So an open adoption means that there is some form of contact between the birth family and the adoptive family. I would say more than half of our adoptions, there's some kind of openness, and that may mean that, the birth parent wants a letter 3 times a year, or they want emails, or, if they really want to be involved, they have a visitation. So, there's a spectrum of openness that somebody could be comfortable with. Maybe it's that they only want a letter once a year, but they're allowing the child to contact them once they reach 18. So then, you may have a closed adoption where the birth parent really does not want contact. For whatever reason, they do not want their child to be able to contact them when they're 18. They don't want to have contact with you. So, it's really up to the birth parent to decide what that's going to look like, whether it's closed or open. So going into adoption, you kind of have to know that you will not really get to choose the contact you have with your birth parent. So, like I said, I think it used to be that all adoptions were pretty closed, right? And so actually they just passed that bill where adoptees had access to their birth certificates, and they didn't used to, because it used to be a completely different process. So, I think we've shifted because we realized that if birth parents want to be involved, it's more beneficial than a closed adoption. That's not to say that, I know lots of families who have closed adoptions who have perfectly wonderful relationships and children, but that, we're pushing for this openness because adoption is just done differently. We want to involve the birth parent and we want the process to be birth parent driven. So more and more we're seeing that open adoption is the way that adoption is going. So I think also with that said is that, there's some disappointment sometimes if it's not open, right? That's sometimes hard too, because your adoption could be closed. So hopefully that answered your question about, I don't know if it just said what is a closed adoption or about.
I was to elaborate on it, which I think you just did.
Okay.
And I just,
yeah, no, please. I wanted to actually
get I wanted to add too that this applies to foster care as well. So it wouldn't just be if you did an independent adoption, you have that option of doing an open or closed adoption as well when you adopt from foster care. And just as Olivia said, we recognize the benefit of open adoption. It's on a continuum. It's not just black or white, one or the other. There's a range. And it's really crucial and important for your child's identity development. We have learned over time that our youth, they want to know who their birth families are. They want to know their birth story. And it ends up being far more healthy for them to know their story and their birth parents, whether or not they end up actually having contact with them, than to not. So yes, I agree with Olivia. We definitely are encouraging some form of open adoption because it is proving to be the most beneficial path for children.
And that would also be true even in like a temporary foster care arrangement, or at least this is my understanding, that to the extent that it's possible to be having contact with it when it's possible, and not a problem, but to be having contact with the family members of children that are just in your care temporarily. Is that right?
Absolutely. And actually, when you are going through foster care, remember I mentioned that reunification is the primary goal. So a part of reunification means that the birth parents typically have a court order to visit with their children. And the court decides based on recommendations provided by the placement agencies what visitation is going to look like. And it's always in the best interest of the child. So sometimes it's going to be, 3 days a week for 3 hours each visitation, or maybe there's more concern and they're more conservative with visitation and it's not as frequent, but there is definitely contact between children and their birth family, and not just their parents. We also have a priority to make sure that we're keeping our children connected to their siblings, because of those are their lifelong connections, and to grandparents if grandparents are available.
So what I find so fascinating about this particular question, which we get every webinar, is that it really does pertain to every path available to queer men, each of these 4 paths. So Anthony, I'm wondering if you could talk about, because this is something that comes up very early on in the surrogacy process when you're being matched with your surrogate and also with an egg donor, is future contact right after the child is born. Can you talk a little bit about some considerations that people think through when it comes to that?
Absolutely. I agree with Olivia and Bonnie on the benefits of sharing the origin story with their child and doing it from an early point in the process. This goes back to also whether you choose to have a known egg donor or whether you have a semi-known egg donor, which is sort of akin to the adoption where the egg donor is open to having the child contact them when they're 18. I was drawn to a known egg donor because I wanted to have a relationship with her, and I wanted my son to have a relationship with her, and also for medical reasons, so that we could, if there were any issues that came up, that we would have contact with her. But the ongoing relationship is really something that I don't think you can help in a surrogacy journey. I think you forge such a unique bond with the people who are helping you have your family, particularly with your surrogate, that it naturally occurs. There was a study that was done on post-birth contact with gay dads and their surrogates. My husband and I took part in it. It was one of the first longitudinal studies from the Center for Family Research at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And they found basically that right after the birth of the child, there's a flurry of communication. And then as the child gets older, communication naturally wanes a little bit. And then it may become a call on Mother's Day or Christmas card or birthday presents. But the main finding of the study was that all of the parties, the children, the surrogates, and the parents, were comfortable with that sort of natural progression. And I think it is. I think it's incredibly beneficial for the children to understand the team that essentially brought them into the world.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So hopefully that answered your question. Any other questions about any like relationships ongoing, please feel free to share them here. But so this next one, I feel like there's some confusion. We're getting quite a few questions about some terminology here. So the difference between an independent adoption and domestic infant adoption, adopting through foster care. So Olivia, can you talk specifically about what it is that you all do with domestic infant adoption and how that differs from other forms of adoption?
Yeah, so we're at Friends in Adoption. We're domestic private agency, meaning that we work only within the US, right? So that means we don't do international adoption with domestic. So some agencies will do international adoption where they adopt from different countries. And then independent to me means that you're not working with an agency. So that means that you find your own social worker or your own lawyer or attorney, and you're not going through the agency, which has its pros and cons, right? There's pros and cons to every path, but I would say, just to up the agency is that the pros of going through an agency as opposed to just an independent attorney is that the agency, basically does all of the work for you. We find the family, we do all of the finding your lawyer, finding your social worker, we give you a case manager, and then post-adopt, we become an alumni network for you and support you for the rest of your life as well as the child. So there's just more of a, you need a little more guidance, I think, is what an agency. And if you really feel like you want to take the reins and go on your own path, then you can either work with like a social worker or a who will also then bring in a lawyer. So it just depends how what you want to steer and guide kind of thing. So that's the difference between like independent and agency and domestic and international.
Absolutely. So, and again, so this is, if you're hoping to adopt a newborn and work with a birth family that is expecting, then that's the process that Olivia just described. So on the other side is if you're working through foster care, these are children that are already in the foster care system, and then you would work with an agency like Bonnie. So Bonnie, can you talk just quickly about the difference? Because you can still adopt through foster care, but you can also just foster children temporarily in foster care. So if you could talk a little bit about the difference there.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you become a resource parent, which is a foster parent, it's the new terminology, resource, you typically, at least here in California, you're duly certified so that you have your license to foster and your license to adopt. And we do that purposefully because we know that when children are in foster care, if it turns out that they are unable to reunify with their family, we don't want to cause more trauma and remove them from yet another home. And find them an adoptive home. We want to keep them with the family who has already been caring for them. So the family fosters the child first. The goal is to reunify. If that child can reunify, that child will go home with the parents. If the child cannot, then the resource family will be able to adopt that child. You can elect to not adopt a child. You can elect to just be a foster parent or a resource parent. But we do really encourage families to think about that trauma that can happen for that child if you choose to foster only and have that child removed from your care to go find yet another family to attach to. That being said, there's always a need for emergency shelter care. And so that's really temporary. That's like a month of care, just in general terms, where say, for instance, a child is an emergency, child comes into foster care and they don't have a family to place them with. They'll place them with an emergency shelter home until they can find a resource family to care for that child. So for folks who really are not looking to adopt, that might be the better route for them to still foster and help a child. But again, we really do strongly encourage parents to think about adopting from foster care if they're actually going through the foster care route. Does that make sense?
I hope so. And I'll just, for anyone, for each of these paths, there's such a crazy vernacular around it. It takes a little bit to get used to it, but you will get there. I promise. We should develop like a Rosetta Stone just to be able to speak gay parenting. It's a little complicated. But yeah, I hope that cleared it up. If it didn't, please let us know. Okay, great. So this next one is around surrogacy. So someone wants to know, they have a friend who's willing to donate her eggs. And I know this is a very common thing to happen within the LGBTQ community, and a cousin who's willing to be the surrogate. So they're wondering how this would impact the cost and the process at all. If you can talk a little bit about that, Anthony.
Sure. This is a similar conversation that Olivia just had about working with an agency or doing surrogacy independently. And I echo her comments that when you work with an agency, you've got people in place to put all of the moving parts together for you. We do at Circle, we do work with people who bring in their own surrogates and they bring in their own egg donors. That sort of create a tailor-made program for them, but you can also do it independently. If you are a very well-organized person, you can find a surrogacy attorney or an assisted reproductive technology attorney who can sort of be your guide through the process, since you have those other moving sort of parts in place. You want to make sure, though, that you have the support systems in place for the egg donor and for the surrogate, even if you're related to or are friends with them, because they're going to be going through this journey and they need the same type of mental health support, often financial support. They need to understand the insurance aspects of surrogacy, even if they're doing it altruistically or for no compensation. You still want to have agreements in place drafted by attorneys. You want to have independent legal representation in the process. And that is where an agency can sort of put all of those pieces in place for you. As far as the costs are concerned, if you do an independent surrogacy, it's going to bring the costs down because you're going to be paying each individual component, each individual attorney, social worker, clinic. You'll be paying them independently, but you won't be paying an agency fee. So you essentially, can save a considerable amount of money doing that. But what you pay for with the agency fee, in a way, is a peace of mind that that all of the steps in the journey are going to be covered carefully and correctly, and that you'll get to the other end without any worries. So there's give and take with both, but you absolutely can do it. And it sounds like you've got a great support system around you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I'm combining some other questions here because we've gotten several questions about the legal ramifications of this, depending on the state you're in for each of these paths. So first, I'm just going to, before I hand this off to you, Olivia, to answer. So someone's asking if what to do if you're in a state that doesn't allow same-sex adoption. So just so everyone knows, it is legal across the country. It has been since gay marriage was legalized here. It was a great consequence of that law or of that Supreme Court ruling. So no matter what state you're in, you can adopt. If you are a gay man, you can serve as a foster parent as a gay man. So that's a common misconception, is that there's still states that don't allow it. So that said, there are lots of laws coming down the pike from states that try to make it legal for certain agencies to discriminate against LGBTQ people. And in some states, your choices are going to be few and far between. Others, you'll have more. But so just so you, and this as a shout out here for people that are looking for an agency to work with. I mean, both Extraordinary Families and Friends in Adoption have gone through the HRC. I'm forgetting. All families, all something. I'm forgetting.
All children, all families.
So it's not like I'll let you both talk a little bit more about this process, but this isn't. It's a pretty rigorous process to make sure that the agencies that they put on their website are vetted for, again, not just being LGBT friendly, but very affirming and proactive in their work with LGBTQ families. But so I'll turn it over to you guys if you can just talk a little bit more about what you know of the legal differences between states and how that might impact either foster care or adoption. Let's start with you, Olivia.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I'm pretty sure like 2017, in the Supreme Court, they said that basically, you can't, it's 50, all 50 states, right? Where we run into issues is that adoption agencies are still allowed to discriminate in certain states. So you have adoption agencies, I won't name names, but oftentimes they're religious based and faith based.
I'll name them later if anyone wants. Just email me. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't want to trash anybody, but there are actually, I'm in the state of New York right now, and there are two that I can think of that do not adopt out to same-sex couples, and also because this is part of our philosophy, who are not pro-choice, right? Who, if a woman or an individual calls in, they will not refer them to abortion services and try to coerce them into adoption, which is not the right option either. So there are, and like I said, there are also laws coming down, or David said there are laws that are coming down that are trying to stop agencies from discriminating. However, especially if they're private and they don't receive government money, a lot of them are still allowed to say no to same-sex couples. So you just work with an agency that works with you, right? As mentioned, me, Bonnie, and clearly Anthony all work with same-sex couples. And if you go to the HRC website, there's actually a list of HRC compliant adoption agencies and foster care families. And so you can know that, you're working with an agency that's going to support you. And I know for us that we work throughout the entire United States. So even if you're in, Nevada, California, wherever, Friends in Adoption can work with you. So you have that option.
So I'll expand this a little bit for foster care. I know some of that's very similar for foster care, but because foster care is such a hyper-local process compared to domestic adopting a newborn in the U.S., can you just talk about some of the how the laws can change state to state and sometimes even county to county within the foster care realm?
Well, I mean, I think it really is pretty much the same that Olivia was stating. You absolutely can foster and adopt from foster care, but you're going to run into agencies, particularly the private foster family agencies who may discriminate and not be inclusive and will choose not to approve families who identify as LGBTQ+. So it is pretty much the same answer that Olivia gave. And so again, it's just making sure that you vet your agency if you're going to go through an agency. And again, I think, David, you said this too. It also depends on, because where you live obviously may depend on whether or not there's actually going to be an agency that you can work with. So even though it may be legal, there may not be an agency anywhere close to you, unfortunately. Where I'm at, which is, Los Angeles, we have quite a few agencies available for folks who identify as LGBTQ+. And so that's a great benefit if you are in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'll just say for like a political framework here, there are two things that are interested in either adoption or foster care. The Supreme Court heard a case this past year that's about this very topic as to whether or not state-funded welfare agencies or child welfare agencies can legally discriminate against LGBTQ people and also single people or people of different faiths, all sorts of different stuff. And, with the court makeup the way that it is, it's not looking fantastic for us. So that doesn't mean that it will still be legal to adopt and to serve as foster parents in every state in the country, but it might allow additional agencies that receive government money to continue to discriminate. So this is, again, why it's so important for everyone to do your research before you reach out to an agency so you don't have to have a really unpleasant interaction with an agency that's going to be discriminatory. So again, on our website, and again, HRC has an even more extensive list. So now moving to surrogacy. So this is, you're not going to find many surrogacy agencies, I think, that are going to discriminate against LGBTQ people that I can think of. Again, a lot have a much more firm track record working with our community, but laws do differ pretty dramatically state to state. I'm also in New York, and we just legalized surrogacy. We were one of the last states to do it, to legalize compensated surrogacy. But so if you could just talk a little bit about the very complicated legal landscape with surrogacy state to state, Anthony.
Yeah, surrogacy is all state law based, and the law that's going to attach is the law of the state where your carrier gives birth. So your agency can be in New York, they can be anywhere, your clinic can be anywhere, but the law that's going to attach to your journey is the law where your carrier gives birth. Right now, there are only 3 states that we don't match intended parents with, we don't accept surrogates from. That's Michigan, Louisiana, and Nebraska. And up until, as you said, David, on the 15th of this month, New York was one of those states. New York compensated surrogacy was criminalized. And now New York has one of the most surrogate-friendly laws in the country. So it really is the key to the process is finding an attorney who understands the laws, understands how to create parentage for you, which is also dictated by the law of the state where your carrier gives birth. Sometimes it's done through something called a pre-birth order. Sometimes it's done by something called a post-birth order, but it's a court order that creates that parentage for you and terminates the rights of the surrogate upon birth. And it's just important to understand the framework of the law when you match with a surrogate. So if you're working with an agency, you get a surrogate profile, you see where she's from, to ask questions about what the law is like, because that's going to tell you about what your surrogacy journey will be like.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so in the 5 minutes we have remaining, I'm going to choose a question that again applies to all these paths, and if we can be succinct about this, but it's an interesting one, which is someone's wondering about the speed and success rate of each of these paths to parenthood, where you actually bring a child home with you. So I will say, just for co-parenting, it's pretty high, unless potentially you could end up having some sort of challenges with infertility that are unforeseen that could complicate your path. But if you're dealing with people that are reproductively healthy, then it's a pretty high percentage of success rate. So that's an easy answer. But why don't we'll stick with surrogacy, actually, if you can talk about how often, especially gay queer men are successful in surrogacy.
Yeah, it's actually, as gay men, we have some of the highest fertility rates in IVF world, because we use young, medically screened egg donors and healthy, medically screened surrogates who have histories of easy pregnancies. So that right there puts your success rate on the first try between 60 and 70% with a single embryo transfer. Every clinic is going to have different numbers, but make sure that you ask them, what are their numbers for gay men working with egg donors? Because those are the specific numbers that will apply to you. The time frame when you work with an agency, our time frame at Circle is just under 22 months, 17 to 22 months from when you sign on with the agency to when you have your child. Every agency is going to have a little bit different matching times. I think COVID affected that to a certain degree. But as far as success rates go, as gay men, this is one area where we're kind of at the top of the list.
Yes, that's nice. If you talk to fertility doctors that work in this space, it's always kind of fascinating, because they're, those success rates are so high with, like you said, that you're dealing with a man that's reproductively healthy and a healthy surrogate. So it's, success rates are much higher than the other families that are attracted to surrogacy, which tend to be struggling with some forms of infertility. Okay, so success rate's kind of a more complicated way to talk about this for adoption and foster care. But let's start with foster to adopt. So if that's what your goal is, because obviously if you register as a foster family, my understanding is that you typically can have a placement very quickly after that, so it might be the quickest speed if you're, so if you can talk about that, and then just success rates for adopting through the foster care system specifically.
Yeah, so as soon as you go through the approval process, you could potentially get a phone call the day that you sign your paperwork and have a child join your home. And that could be the child who joins your forever family. So, I mean, that's one timeline, but there's multiple timelines in foster care, and it gets really complicated. And I don't think we have time to go through all of it. But that could be your child, and it may not. That may, that child may reunify, and it could be the next day or however long you need in between. Another child is going to join your home. People always ask this question, how long is it going to take to adopt, or the success rate of adoption? And I always just tell them, and I think I said it before, if your goal is to adopt from foster care, you absolutely will. And it's, again, it may not be the first child who comes into your home, but you will adopt. If you stick to the process, you're going to adopt. I think the timeline, maybe it would be a question perhaps that I help answer later, only because it's so complicated and has to do with court timelines. I'm happy to discuss it, but I think it might take up too much time.
Which also depends on the county or the state you're in. And so again, for domestic infant adoption, this is also a complicated, really does depend on your circumstances. But if you can talk about, how often people are successful adopting an infant in the U.S.
Yeah, so I would say, and I don't know if this is also the same question, but someone was asking about, waiting time start to finish. So we sort of start the waiting process after you've done all of the laundry list of things that you need to do, which is like a home study, building your profile, talking to a case manager. So you're doing all of this pre-work to make sure that you're actually we vet you to adopt, right? That you're able to adopt. You have to pass a home study to adopt, and that goes for foster care as well, I believe. And you have to go through a home study. Yeah. So you definitely have to sort of do all of these pre-approved things first. So that is not going into the 6 to 12 month wait time of waiting for the actual to be chosen by a birth parent. So after you go through all of the steps that it takes to be pre-approved for adoption, you're waiting. Like I said, it's just similar to what Bonnie said. It is very, some people will literally get a phone call 2 weeks after they go live. And some people are calling us, wondering what they're doing wrong because they're on month, 8 or 9, right? So the answer is nothing. You're doing nothing wrong. But so, it's kind of this waiting process. And so I really would say that, I think our longest waiting family is at 13 months. But usually after that, that's, but you could wait up to, I think, 2 years technically, but really I would say 13 months. And success rate wise, there's always there is always the possibility that an individual will change their mind. With every state has a different period after they sign to change their mind. Sometimes it's 5 days. In New York, it's 30 days. So you do have to know that part of adoption is knowing that a birth parent can change their mind. And there's a certain amount of window of time that we want to give them compassionately, because we want this to be the right decision for them. We don't want anyone to make an adoption and think that wasn't the right thing for me. So there's always a chance of that. But I would say, a couple times a year we have a fall through, as it's called. So sorry, I feel like I'm talking over the time, but just know that is part of the adoption process. We will get you through it, and it is always when and not if, as I've said multiple times. So you will be placed. I hear horror stories of people who wait 5 years, and I just don't know what's happening with them, because we will always place you. You will adopt. As Bonnie said, there will be an adoption. So
basically all these passes, it can be a waiting game, but it will happen.
Yes, it will happen. Right, exactly. We've never had somebody not adopt through the 31 years we've been going.
Yeah, exactly. So patience is a virtue when it comes to becoming a queer dad, unfortunately. So I just very quickly added the links where you can learn a little bit more about each of our panelists from Friends in Adoption, Surrogacy, and Extraordinary Families. I can't thank our panelists enough. This again it's my favorite webinar that we do, because it is just, we have a lot of amazing information presented, but it's also our quickest. We might need to think about expanding this one, because I am sorry if we didn't get to your question, but please do email us at dads@gayswithkids.com. We will get back to you. And then also please check out our events page on our website, gayswithkids.com, where we have listed a ton of each of these items that we've been talking about around finances, about matching with a surrogate, about matching with a birth parent. We have a whole webinar series devoted to each of these topics. So we spent a whole hour talking about each of those. So if you already know the path that you're most interested in, please do look at those and sign up for upcoming webinars. We have a ton of great resources coming out every day. So hopefully we'll see you all in a future webinar. If you have any feedback about this one, please, again, email us, let us know. We're always trying to improve these. Again, thank you to Bonnie Sharp, Olivia Pope, and Anthony Brown. And I'm not going to keep anyone any longer, because we're past our hour. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.